The philosophy known as Stoicism did not begin in an academy or a palace, but in a humble public place. Its origin is marked by a sudden, personal catastrophe that led one man to fundamentally question the purpose of human existence. The word Stoicism derives its enduring name from the stoa poikile, a Greek phrase that translates literally as the painted porch. This was a famous public colonnade, a covered walkway in the heart of the Athenian agora, the city's marketplace. The stoa was a structure adorned with magnificent, mythological, and historical murals. This public, open-air setting, used by the early thinkers of the movement, was highly symbolic. It represented the Stoic conviction that true philosophy must be accessible to everyone, practiced daily amidst the noise and demands of ordinary life, rather than being confined to an elite, isolated school. The founding figure of this philosophy was a merchant named Zeno of Citium, who lived in the period spanning approximately 334 BC to 262 BC. Zeno was not a native Athenian or Greek philosopher, but was a Phoenician, born in the bustling trading city of Citium on the island of Cyprus. This foreign origin is significant, marking Stoicism as a philosophy that was cosmopolitan and global in its very foundations, reflecting its later doctrine of universal citizenship. Zeno's initial life was one of ambitious commerce and accumulated wealth. The seminal, life-altering event that violently changed his direction was a devastating shipwreck that occurred around the year 312 BC on a trading voyage between Phoenicia and the port of Piraeus, outside Athens. In this disaster, Zeno lost virtually all of his valuable cargo and material possessions. This sudden, total loss was a profound, inescapable lesson that forced him to confront the inherent fragility and vulnerability of everything external: property, wealth, and reputation, things that modern life so relentlessly conditions us to value above all else. After the shipwreck, Zeno arrived in Athens with nothing but his wits and a deep sense of questioning. While spending time in a bookstall, he began reading a work about the great philosopher Socrates. He was immediately struck by the portrait of Socratic composure, self-mastery, and intellectual integrity in the face of death and political persecution. Zeno famously turned to the bookseller and asked with a desperate sincerity, "Where are men like that, men of such character to be found today?" The bookseller simply pointed to the renowned philosopher Crates of Thebes, who happened to be walking past the stall. Crates was a leading figure of the Cynic school of philosophy. Zeno became a dedicated student of Crates and spent many formative years immersed in the rigorous, ascetic discipline of Cynicism. This foundational school emphasized living in absolute accordance with nature, cultivating self-sufficiency, and deliberately rejecting all conventional societal values, including wealth, social status, and polite convention. This initial period of study would profoundly shape the Stoic commitment to self-sufficiency and the powerful rejection of external, contingent pleasures. Zeno eventually began teaching his own distinct philosophy around the year 300 BC. He gradually and systematically moved away from the more extreme, often antisocial and deeply scornful tendencies of the Cynic tradition. Zeno believed strongly that human beings were fundamentally social creatures, politikon zoon, naturally inclined toward community. His ethical system dictated that virtue must, therefore, be practiced within a political and social community, contributing to the greater good rather than in defiant, solitary isolation. The development of Stoicism is traditionally divided into three major historical phases. First, there is the early Stoa, led by its original founders, Zeno himself, followed by Cleanthes, and the brilliant systematizer, Chrysippus. Next came the Middle Stoa, influenced primarily by thinkers like Palladius and Posidonius. Finally, the most famous period is the Late Stoa, which flourished under the Roman Empire with its great proponents, Seneca, the former slave Epictetus, and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. The early Stoa dedicated immense intellectual energy to establishing a comprehensive and rigorous worldview. Their focus spanned far beyond simple ethics, deeply exploring complex topics like logic, physics, and metaphysics. They constructed a complete systemic understanding of the cosmos, believing the entire universe was a singular, living, rational entity governed by divine reason. The most critical figure of the early Stoa, recognized even by his contemporaries for his immense intellectual contributions, was Chrysippus of Soli, who lived from approximately 280 BC to 207 BC. Chrysippus took the scattered principles and ethical insights of Zeno and organized them into the complex, coherent philosophical structure we recognize as Stoicism. His work was so foundational to the movement that it was often famously noted, if Chrysippus had not existed, the Stoa would not have existed. He was an astonishingly prolific writer, said to have authored hundreds of complex works, though it is a tragic loss to history that only fragments of these dense, systematic writings survive today. The Middle Stoa marked a pivotal period of synthesis and expansion. Philosophers during this era began integrating the rigorous, often severe, ethical demands of early Stoicism with the pragmatic, practical demands of Roman culture. Palladius of Rhodes was arguably the most crucial figure in this cultural transition. He traveled widely to Rome and was instrumental in making Stoic principles appealing and intellectually fashionable among the Roman ruling class, particularly within the influential intellectual circle surrounding the great general Scipio Aemilianus. This shift ensured that Stoicism would move from the dusty academic benches of Athens to the halls of power in Rome, setting the stage for its greatest historical impact. This journey from the catastrophic loss on the sea to the reasoned composure of the painted porch reveals a fundamental truth about Stoicism. It is a philosophy born from the realization that external fortune is utterly unreliable. The path to tranquility, therefore, must be found within through the deliberate mastery of one's own mind and judgments. This central, unshakable insight leads directly to the core and most practical doctrine of the entire philosophy, the rule that divides our whole experience into two simple, actionable categories: the things we can control and the things we cannot control. This profound division, known as the dichotomy of control, is the essential key to Stoic freedom. The immense intellectual labor of the early Stoa, particularly the systematic work of Chrysippus, provided the rigorous physical and logical foundations necessary to support the ethical life. This foundation leads directly to the core and most practical doctrine of the entire philosophy, the rule that divides our whole experience into two simple, actionable categories: the things we can control and the things we cannot control. This profound division, known as the dichotomy of control, is the essential key to Stoic freedom. The central, unshakable doctrine of all Stoic practice, and the simplest distillation of its wisdom, is the dichotomy of control. This principle states, with absolute clarity, that the entire universe of human experience is divided into two mutually exclusive spheres: things that are entirely up to us and things that are absolutely not up to us. All anxiety, fear, and emotional turmoil arise from our failure to correctly distinguish between these two spheres. The sphere of things that are up to us is small but infinitely powerful. It includes our opinions or judgments about events, our fundamental desires, our aversions, and most crucially, our internal volition or moral choice, what the Stoics termed prohairesis. These elements reside entirely within the realm of our own conscious will. No external force, no tyrant, no illness, and no misfortune can ever compel us to change our fundamental moral choice or our inner assent to a proposition. This unassailable inner fortress is the source of all human dignity and freedom. Conversely, the sphere of things that are not up to us is vast and encompassing. It includes the physical body itself, our property and wealth, our reputation and social status, the consequences of past external events, the unpredictable weather, the relentless flow of time, and perhaps most frequently, the actions and opinions of other people. These factors are external to our will and are inherently, ultimately, uncontrollable by our conscious intention. The single, transformative goal of Stoic practice is the disciplined art of directing our energy exclusively toward what we fully control, our own judgments, beliefs, and moral responses, and simultaneously learning to embrace and accept everything external with calm, rational indifference. This acceptance is not a form of weak, passive resignation. Rather, it is a profound form of rational engagement with reality, an acknowledgement that fighting the inevitable is the highest form of self-inflicted pain. The term externals, in the language of Stoicism, is often used interchangeably with indifference, the Greek term being a diaphora. This designation signifies that external circumstances are things that are neither inherently good nor inherently bad in a moral sense. They are merely the neutral material upon which the rational will must practice its moral action. A stone is indifferent, so too is wealth, or the lack thereof. To create a practical ethical system, the Stoics further refined their classification of indifference into categories. They recognized preferred indifference, such as good health, comfortable wealth, a positive reputation, and physical strength, and dispreferred indifference, such as sickness, poverty, a bad reputation, and physical weakness. These things possess genuine practical value, axia, in the daily running of life. It is easier to practice virtue when healthy than when sick, but they possess no true moral value. This leads to a critical Stoic insight. The possession of a preferred indifferent, such as immense wealth, does not make a person morally virtuous or guarantee their happiness. It merely provides more convenient opportunities to practice virtue, e.g., using that wealth generously or justly. Conversely, the complete lack of wealth and the endurance of poverty does not make a person morally vicious or unhappy. Therefore, the only true good that exists in the universe, according to the Stoic system, is a properly functioning, pure, and rational moral will. This faculty, when operating correctly, the Stoics equated directly with virtue itself. It is the only thing truly worth seeking. Similarly, the only true evil is a corrupted, misguided, or irrational moral will, which the Stoics equated directly with vice. Everything else in the cosmos, from planetary motion to the state of one's digestion, is deemed morally neutral. The fundamental source of all human suffering, anxiety, and neurosis, according to the Stoics, is the failure to properly grasp and apply the dichotomy of control. This results in the generation of destructive emotional distress, or passions, because we irrationally assign moral weight and ultimate significance to things we cannot possibly influence. The Stoics meticulously identified this failure as the error in judgment, the moment we assent to the false belief that an indifferent is actually a good or an evil, the four cardinal virtues and the highest good. Since the ultimate good is virtue, Stoicism defines this moral excellence not as a vague, singular trait, but as a practical, actionable intelligence, systematically divided into four specific, interdependent categories. Stoicism holds that all virtue, without exception, is fundamentally rooted in knowledge and reason. Virtue is the intelligence that chooses rightly. The complete, consistent practice of this rational virtue leads directly to the state of eudaimonia, a Greek term often inadequately translated as happiness, but more accurately described as human flourishing, living well, or having a good guardian spirit. Eudaimonia is the highest aim of the entire human experience. The four primary pillars of moral excellence, the cardinal virtues of Stoicism, were adopted and refined from the earlier Platonic tradition. They are wisdom, practical knowledge, justice, fair dealing and benevolence, courage, moral fortitude and endurance, and temperance, self-control and moderation. Wisdom, phronesis, is considered the highest virtue because it is the intellectual competence that governs all others. It is the practical, actionable knowledge, the ability to correctly choose the right course of action in any given moral or practical circumstance. It is the intelligence that correctly applies the dichotomy of control, ensuring one's judgment is aligned with the truth of the universe. Justice, dikaiosune, is the moral imperative rooted in our rational, social nature. It demands that we treat all others fairly, equitably, and benevolently, recognizing that all human beings, by virtue of their shared reason, are part of the larger universal rational community, the cosmopolis. Courage, Andrea, is defined much more broadly than mere physical bravery on the battlefield. It is primarily moral strength, the ability to face necessary hardship, fear, pain, or potential loss without compromising one's ethical integrity. It is the fortitude to hold to one's rational principles despite external pressure. Temperance, sophrosyne, is the vital virtue of self-mastery and moderation. It is the diligent control of one's appetites, desires, and aversions, ensuring that all one's actions and internal responses are governed entirely by calm reason, not by destructive, chaotic impulse. The Stoic system holds that these four virtues are profoundly interdependent and inseparable. It is impossible to possess one virtue without possessing all the others. For example, a person cannot truly execute an act of justice without the wisdom to know what is fair in the specific situation, the courage to enact it despite opposition, and the self-control to execute it without personal emotional bias. The ultimate radical claim of Stoicism is that virtue is entirely sufficient for eudaimonia. A person who achieves perfect virtue, the theoretical sage, is perfectly and completely happy, even if they are simultaneously suffering under the most extreme external duress, such as torture, loss of family, or public humiliation. Since their good resides entirely within their rational will, it can never be touched by externals. The concept of eudaimonia in Stoicism is, therefore, entirely distinct from the common modern concept of pleasure-based happiness. It is not an emotion or a fleeting state of mind contingent on good fortune, but a profound, stable state of being achieved through persistent rational action and moral excellence. The central ethical injunction of the entire philosophy is to live in accordance with nature. For the Stoics, this injunction has two essential meanings. First, living in accordance with human rational nature, which dictates that we are intelligent, social beings. And second, living in accordance with the universal rational nature, the divine order known as the Logos, which governs all things. This idea of aligning the inner self with the outer cosmos demands an understanding of the Stoic physics, which views the entire universe as a deterministic, rational, and benevolent entity. The next facts will explore the role of the Logos and Providence, which ensures that all events, even seemingly tragic ones, are necessary parts of a larger, perfect, rational design. The foundational belief that virtue is the only true good leads the Stoics into a comprehensive system of physics where the ethical life becomes inseparable from the understanding of the universe. The Stoics were not just moralists, they were rigorous cosmologists who sought to align human reason with universal reason. The next facts will explore the role of the Logos and Providence, which ensures that all events, even seemingly tragic ones, are necessary parts of a larger, perfect, rational design. The central governing concept of the entire Stoic physical universe is the Logos. This Greek term, meaning reason, word, or governing principle, is understood as the universal, divine reason, order, and pervasive intelligence that actively permeates and governs all of existence. The Logos is often equated by the Stoics with the concepts of God, nature, or all-encompassing providence. It is not a distant, transcendent creator, but an immanent, active force within the world. The Stoic system of physics is fundamentally materialistic, a concept that may seem counterintuitive to a philosophy often associated with spirituality. However, the Stoics believed that all existence, including the human soul, the gods, and even seemingly abstract concepts, is composed of a specific type of matter. This matter is not inert. It is a divine, reasoning, fiery substance called pneuma, which can be translated as vital breath or spirit. This pneuma acts as the efficient cause, shaping and organizing all of matter according to the dictates of the Logos. The cosmos is consequently viewed not as a collection of random objects, but as a single, perfectly ordered, living, rational organism. This organism is entirely deterministic. Everything that occurs, from the most minor physical event to the grandest sweep of history, happens through an unbroken, necessary chain of cause and effect, dictated entirely by the Logos. This divine reason ensures that the outcome of every event is the best possible outcome for the whole, the universe, as a rational system. This unwavering belief in a rational providence, pronoia, is crucial to the Stoic emotional stability. The Stoic does not believe in a chaotic, capricious, or indifferent universe, but in one where all phenomena, even those that seem personally harmful or tragic, are necessary and logically compelled parts of a larger, perfect, or rational design. Nothing is truly random. Everything happens as it must for the optimal functioning of the universal organism. The practice of ascent, syncatethesis, is therefore the internal, intellectual act of agreeing with what the Logos inevitably delivers. It is the full, rational acceptance of one's fate, not as a random blow, but as a necessary and important contribution to the greater rational good of the entire universe. This acceptance transforms the necessary into the desired. The Stoics even extended this deterministic view to cosmic time, proposing the concept of recurrent cycles. They believed that the cosmos, driven by the pneuma, would periodically reach a point of maximum tension and be consumed by a vast general conflagration, ekpyrosis. Out of this universal fire, the cosmos would be reborn and repeat the exact same cosmic cycle, the same people, the same events, the same actions, infinitely many times. This deep cosmic perspective was intended to further detach the practitioner from the unique significance of any single, fleeting life or event. The human soul is considered a fragment, a separated spark of the divine Logos, pneuma. This divine spark is the rational faculty, the moral choice, prohairesis, which is the absolute seat of our only true free will and our capacity for moral judgment. Therefore, the only true human freedom is the recognition and rational acceptance of necessity. The wise person does not attempt to fight the flow of the river of fate, but rationally chooses to assent to what fate demands, thus aligning their finite inner will perfectly with the infinite universal will. The Stoics, recognizing the limits of human endurance, did entertain a concept of suicide, which they called a rational exit, eulogos exagogy. This was not permitted out of cowardice or emotional distress, but was considered justifiable only if a person lost all capacity to act virtuously, e.g., due to extreme, incurable illness, severe madness, or absolute political suppression. If continued life served no rational purpose or actively hindered the practice of virtue, the sage was permitted to leave the stage of life with philosophical dignity. The single greatest fear for the Stoic is never death, poverty, or pain, but moral corruption, the permanent degradation of the divine rational fragment within the human soul. The ultimate failure is the failure to reason well. The discipline of desire, controlling aversion and appetite. The Stoic ethical training is rigorously segmented to address the different aspects of human experience. The second major area of Stoic training focuses specifically on the management of human appetites, aversions, and the destructive emotions that arise from them. Epictetus, the great slave teacher of the late Stoa, organized the philosophical training into three primary areas, which serve as the curriculum for the dedicated student: the discipline of assent, focused on judgment and truth; the discipline of desire, focused on managing emotions and fate; and the discipline of action, focused on duty to community. The discipline of desire is specifically aimed at managing the natural human impulse to seek things, appetite, or to avoid things, aversion. The goal is to purify these instincts, ensuring that we only truly desire what is inherently good, virtue, and only truly avoid what is inherently evil, vice. All other desires and aversions should be neutral or conditional. Pathos, plural, pathe, is the critical Greek term the Stoics used to denote the four major types of destructive, irrational passions or emotions that arise from erroneous judgments. These passions are the primary source of human misery and anxiety because they are motions of the soul that violate reason. The four principal, irrational passions the Stoics sought to eradicate are distress, pain, caused by the irrational judgment that something external is present and bad. Fear, caused by the irrational judgment that something external is approaching and bad. Lust age appetite, caused by the irrational judgment that something external is present and good. And delight excessive pleasure, caused by the irrational judgment that something external is approaching and good. The ultimate goal of the discipline of desire is the state of apatheia, apathy. This term is grossly misunderstood in modern language. It does not mean the absence of all feeling or becoming a cold, unfeeling automaton, but rather the freedom from all destructive, irrational passions, pathos. The Stoic sage is not devoid of feeling, but possesses a soul whose feelings are stable, rational, and aligned with reason. To counter the destructive passions, the Stoics recognized and cultivated three good emotions, eupatheiai, which are rational and entirely compatible with virtue. Joy, rational delight at the presence of moral goodness. Caution, rational aversion toward moral evil. And wishing, rational desire for the attainment of virtue. Premeditation of evils, premeditatio malorum, is one of the most powerful and counterintuitive Stoic practices within the discipline of desire. It involves mentally rehearsing future potential misfortunes, the loss of wealth, the sickness of a loved one, one's own death, not in order to dwell on morbidity, but to mentally inoculate the mind against their inevitable shock and to prepare a rational response beforehand. The concept of negative visualization is central to this preparatory practice. By consciously and mentally contrasting one's current, fortunate possessions with the state of losing them, one achieves two vital results. First, an increased appreciation for the goods enjoyed in the present moment, and second, a significant reduction in the fear of future, inevitable loss, because the mind has already processed the possibility. The rational Stoic position is that desire and aversion should only be directed toward things within the small, manageable sphere of the dichotomy of control, specifically toward one's own moral judgments and actions. To irrationally desire wealth, fame, or the affection of others is to hand over one's inner tranquility to the capricious whims of external fortune, inviting certain disappointment and predictable emotional distress. The practice of self-sufficiency, autarkia, in the realm of desire means intentionally minimizing one's reliance on external, contingent factors for internal contentment. This ensures that one's happiness is entirely self-generated, sustained by one's own reason and virtue, and thus becomes utterly unassailable by the external vicissitudes of fortune. This emphasis on the inner life transitions directly into the great literary contributions of the Roman period, where the philosophy found its most famous voices. The practical wisdom of the discipline of desire found its greatest literary expression and popular reach through the works of three major figures during the Roman imperial period. These individuals, a wealthy statesman, a former slave, and an emperor, demonstrated that Stoicism was a philosophy applicable to every social stratum, successfully adapting this ancient Greek system for the pragmatic and challenging world of imperial Rome. The first of these towering figures of the late Stoa is Lucius Annaeus Seneca, who lived from approximately 4 BC to 65 AC. Seneca was not just a philosopher. He was a brilliant orator, a powerful statesman, a prolific writer of philosophical letters and essays, and a tragic dramatist. His life was defined by its dramatic tension as he served as the political advisor and highly influential tutor to the infamously cruel young Emperor Nero. Seneca's major surviving philosophical works, which consist primarily of his intimate moral letters to Lucilius and several extensive moral essays, including On Providence, On Tranquility of Mind, and On Anger, are celebrated for their highly accessible, engaging style. Unlike the dense academic treatises of the early Stoa, Seneca's writings focus intensely on practical ethics, the enduring value of friendship, the preparedness for death, and the specific techniques for managing the highly destructive passion of anger. Seneca's personal life was a significant source of controversy both then and now because he became immensely wealthy during his political career, accumulating a vast fortune. Critics often questioned the sincerity of his Stoic commitment to self-sufficiency and indifference to externals. Seneca countered this criticism by arguing that wealth itself is a neutral indifferent. He maintained that its possession was neither good nor bad, but that it provided him with more material to practice virtues like generosity and equanimity than poverty allowed. He openly accepted that he was still only a proficient, prokopton, a diligent student making progress, not the unattainable ideal of the sage. The complexity of Seneca's political entanglements ultimately led to his tragic end. He was implicated, whether rightly or wrongly, in the Pisonian conspiracy, a plot aimed at assassinating the Emperor Nero. In 65 AC, the paranoid emperor commanded his former tutor to commit suicide. Seneca accepted this fate with philosophical composure, discussing the nature of virtue and death with his friends to the very end. His final hours, recorded by the historian Tacitus, provided a perfect real-world example of the Stoic ideal of a rational exit, proving the efficacy of his philosophical teachings. The second great figure, Epictetus, who lived from approximately 55 AC to 135 AC, represents the philosophy in its purest, most rigorous, and most humble form. Born into slavery in Hierapolis, Epictetus was stripped of all external freedoms. Yet it was precisely in this condition that he learned the philosophy from his master Epaphroditus, a powerful secretary to Emperor Nero. The entire philosophy of Epictetus centers with laser-like precision on the single concept of the moral will, or prohairesis. He taught that external circumstances, even the condition of slavery, are irrelevant to a person's inner freedom. He famously insisted that even a slave, stripped of all possessions and physical autonomy, is perfectly and absolutely free if they successfully retain complete, rational control over their judgment and assent, the very core of the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, following the tradition of Socrates, left no writings of his own. His profound, direct, and often witty teachings were diligently recorded by his devoted student, Ariano, Flavius Arrian, who captured his teacher's distinct voice. These teachings survive today in two essential complementary texts, the longer, more discursive discourses, and the shorter, intensely practical summary known as the Enchiridion, or the Manual. The Enchiridion became, in effect, the essential pocket guide for Stoic practitioners throughout the Roman world. It consists of direct, memorable rules, aphorisms, and practical techniques for daily life, all rigorously based on the uncompromising application of the dichotomy of control. It is a text focused entirely on how to respond to the world, not on how the world should be. The third and most powerful figure is Marcus Aurelius, who lived from approximately 121 AC to 180 AC. Marcus Aurelius ascended to become the Roman emperor, ruling the vast empire from 161 AC to 180 AC. His reign was marked by constant external pressure, wars on the Danube, the devastating Antonine Plague, and the burden of governing a world at its peak. He is the most celebrated historical example of the Stoic ideal of the philosopher king. Marcus Aurelius's world-famous work, known to us as the Meditations, its original Greek title ta eis heauton means to himself, was never intended for public consumption. It is rather his deeply private philosophical diary, a continuous, intimate record of self-admonition, reflection, and technical philosophical practice. He wrote these reflections primarily during his grueling, multi-year military campaigns on the remote and dangerous Germanic frontier, proving that philosophy was his constant weapon against the chaos of command. The discipline of action, cosmopolitanism, and duty. Despite the necessary focus on internal freedom and self-mastery, Stoicism is not an individualistic philosophy of isolation. It is a deeply social philosophy that mandates active duty and contribution to the universal human community. This commitment forms the basis of the third major area of Stoic training. The discipline of action, the third discipline in Epictetus's curriculum, specifically concerns the fulfillment of one's duty and the necessity of acting justly within the human community. It addresses the practical question: how should a rational, virtuous human being behave in society? The crucial Stoic concept of oikeiosis, pronounced oikeiosis, meaning appropriation or familiarization, describes the fundamental human impulse and the philosophical process by which we extend our sphere of concern. It details how human beings naturally move their focus outward, from self-preservation to immediate family, to friends, to neighbors, to community, and ultimately to all of humanity. The notion of cosmopolitanism is a Stoic invention and one of their most radical contributions to political thought. The term cosmopolis literally means citizen of the world. The Stoics were the first school of philosophy to rigorously argue that one's primary and most fundamental allegiance should be to the rational, universal community of all human beings, rather than being confined exclusively to one's geographically and politically limited city-state, polis. This concept of shared rationality and universal community elevates justice, dikaiosune, to the highest social virtue. Since the human soul is recognized as a fragment of the divine, the Stoic has a rational and moral duty to treat every other human being with profound benevolence, respect, and fairness. The Stoic accepts and takes up specific social roles, such as father, citizen, judge, or soldier, not for personal fame or power, but purely as the practical material for the practice of virtue and as a necessary means of contributing to the well-being of the universal whole. Empathy in the Stoic context is not understood as emotional mirroring, but as rational compassion. When other individuals act foolishly, maliciously, or spitefully, the Stoic trains the mind to see their action not as a personal offense, but as a deep intellectual error and ignorance of the true good. This perspective transforms the malicious act from an occasion for personal anger into an occasion for rational pity and corrective action. Anger, ira in Latin, orge in Greek, is considered by the Stoics, particularly Seneca, to be the most vicious and destructive of all irrational passions, because it is a temporary, acute form of madness that entirely compromises reason. Seneca devoted an entire treatise on anger to demonstrating that this emotion must not be merely moderated, but must be completely extinguished and prevented from taking root in the rational soul. Duty and commitment are central to the discipline of action. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself, through his meditations, that his highest purpose as a rational being was to rise each morning, despite his tiredness or reluctance, and perform the work of a human being, a continuous, selfless service to the wider community. The Stoic technique of indifference to outcome is critically applied to duty. The practitioner must perform the just, rational action to the absolute best of their ability, a thing entirely within their control, but must then accept the external results, whether they are success or failure, as ultimately determined by the larger, rational flow of the logos, a thing entirely outside of their control. The Stoic concept of preferred indifference is further utilized in the context of duty. For instance, good health is a preferred indifferent because it is a powerful resource that allows one to fulfill one's social roles as a friend, a leader, a doctor, far more effectively and consistently than a state of chronic sickness would allow. This commitment to active, rational participation in the world defines the Stoic as a social philosopher, not a retreating hermit. The strong ethical system established by the discipline of action requires a rigorous framework for how the mind perceives and judges reality. The Stoics recognized that our actions are only as good as our understanding. The next facts will delve into Stoic logic and epistemology, exploring the structure of judgment, the nature of assent, and the ultimate crucial difference between physical discomfort and psychological suffering. Stoic philosophy is traditionally understood as being structured into three interconnected fields of study, often illustrated using a simple analogy to show their dependency. They use the image of an orchard, or sometimes a fertile egg, to explain this structure. In the analogy of the egg, logic is the surrounding shell, physics is the egg white or the soil, and ethics is the nourishing yolk or the ripe fruit. The point is that the ethical system, the fruit, depends entirely on the logical framework and the understanding of the universe, the shell and soil, for its security and sustenance. The field of logic for the Stoics was expansive. It included the formal study of grammar, the art of persuasive communication known as rhetoric, and the rigorous practice of dialectic, the method of finding truth through reasoned argument and counter-argument. The Stoics were particularly celebrated and historically influential for their pioneering contribution to propositional logic, the study of logical relationships between statements such as if A, then B. This branch of logic is foundational to much of modern formal reasoning. The Stoic approach to knowledge, or epistemology, centered on the concept of the impression, phantasia. An impression is any input, any piece of information received by the senses, what you see or hear, or by the mind, what you think or remember. Impressions flood the mind constantly. The critical, defining moment of all human experience, according to the Stoics, is the mind's response to an impression. This response is the assent, synkatathesis. Assent is the intellectual act of agreeing that the impression is true, rational, or represents a fact. The Stoic argues that this act of assent is the only place where true, unassailable freedom resides. It is the sole power no one can take from us. The core of all Stoic psychological therapy and practice lies in recognizing this three-part process. An external event, A, generates a mental impression, B, but it is our assent, C, our agreement that the impression is bad or intolerable, that causes the emotional consequence, D. Suffering is not in the event itself, but in the judgment we add to it. This leads to the foundational technique of cognitive distancing. When a difficult or fear-inducing impression arises, the Stoic trains the mind to pause and withhold immediate, rash assent. Instead, the practitioner mentally rephrases the event in neutral, objective terms, thereby withdrawing the false judgment. Epictetus advised his students, remember, an event is only half the story. The other half is your reaction. It is not the event that is troubling you, but only your opinion about it. Catalepsis is the Stoic technical term for reliable knowledge, an impression so vividly clear, precise, and compelling that it forces and compels rational assent. The goal of the Stoic sage is to achieve a state of mind where their impressions are always reliable and their judgments are always true. The Stoics knew this was an unattainable ideal for most, but insisted that only through rigorous training and the elimination of false, confused impressions could one ever approach true knowledge. The concept of prokopton, is the Greek term for a person making progress, a serious student of philosophy. The Stoics were realistic and brutally honest. They believed there were few, if any, true living sages in history. The majority of practitioners, even figures like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, humbly considered themselves merely prokopton, acknowledging that philosophy is a continuous journey, not a destination. The sage, Sophos, remains the mythical, perfect ideal of the philosophy, the perfectly rational being who is entirely free from all irrational passions, apatheia, makes no errors in judgment, and exists in a state of perfect accordance with the universal reason of the Logos. The metaphor of the hypochondriac of the soul is a useful tool promoted by Epictetus. He suggested that just as a physical hypochondriac fears every minor ache and twitch, the untrained, undisciplined mind fears and reacts wildly to every external impression, betraying a fundamental lack of faith in the security offered by the dichotomy of control. This mental hypochondria is the root of anxiety. The nature of pathos, recognizing irrational passions. We briefly introduced the destructive passions earlier, but their systematic classification is key to Stoic therapy, falling directly under the discipline of desire. The Stoics meticulously identified and dissected the nature of these irrational emotions. Pathos, plural pathe, is the essential Greek term that the Stoics used to denote the four major types of destructive, overwhelming, and irrational passions or emotions that arise from erroneous judgments. These passions are the chief sources of all human misery and suffering, precisely because they are chaotic, violent motions of the soul that completely compromise and violate reason. The four principal, irrational passions the Stoics sought to eradicate are distress, pain, light. This is the passion caused by the irrational judgment that something external is present and bad, e.g., this setback is terrible, or my poverty is a moral evil. Fear, phobos. This is the passion caused by the irrational judgment that something external is approaching, and bad, e.g., my future loss will be unbearable, or this potential sickness is worse than death. Lust appetite, epithymia. This is the passion caused by the irrational judgment that something external is present or obtainable and is good, e.g., I must have this wealth to be happy, or this fleeting pleasure is essential. Delight, excessive pleasure, hedon. This is the passion caused by the irrational judgment that something external is approaching or attained and is good, e.g., this triumph is the permanent key to my happiness, or this material success is a moral good. Crucially, the Stoics argued that these passions are not natural, unavoidable parts of the human condition. They are illnesses of the soul, bad habits of judgment that must be rationally healed. Because they are rooted in false judgments about externals, they are entirely within our power to prevent through the correct application of the dichotomy of control. The goal remains apatheia, the freedom from all these destructive, chaotic passions. The Stoic, aiming for eudaimonia, seeks a state of mind where their emotional responses are entirely stable, calm, and aligned with rational truth, responding appropriately to reality without adding fear, anxiety, or excessive craving. To counter the destructive passions, the Stoics cultivated the three good emotions, eupathei, which are rational and entirely compatible with virtue, joy, chara. The rational feeling of delight that arises from the presence of moral goodness, virtue, in one's life or the life of others. Caution, eulabeia. The rational aversion directed only toward moral evil, vice, and not toward neutral externals. Wishing, boulesis. The rational desire directed solely toward the attainment of genuine virtue and moral excellence. Premeditation and visualization. Building resilience. To actively combat the onset of destructive passions, the Stoics developed a series of powerful, actionable mental exercises that specifically target future events and irrational fear. These techniques are central to the discipline of desire. Premeditation of evils, praemeditatio malorum, is one of the most powerful and, to the modern mind, most counterintuitive Stoic practices. This technique involves deliberately, mentally rehearsing future potential misfortunes, the loss of wealth, the sickness of a loved one, public humiliation, or one's own mortality. The purpose is not to wallow in morbidity or invite disaster. The true aim of praemeditatio malorum is a form of mental inoculation. By consciously preparing the mind for worst-case scenarios, the Stoic dramatically reduces the potential shock and terror if and when those events actually occur. Seneca argued that he who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. The Stoic aims to suffer only once when the event arrives, and not repeatedly through fearful anticipation. The concept of negative visualization is central to this preparatory practice. This exercise involves consciously and mentally contrasting one's current fortunate circumstances with the possibility, even the certainty, of losing them. The Stoic will deliberately imagine waking up without their home, without their health, or without their closest friend. This visualization achieves two vital psychological results. It fosters an immediate, profound sense of gratitude and appreciation for the goods that are currently enjoyed in the present moment, increasing contentment. It significantly reduces the fear of future, inevitable loss, because the mind has already faced and processed the possibility, securing the inner self against the shock. The mind has already rehearsed the loss and survived the imagined experience. The Stoic position on desire and aversion is refined through these exercises. They assert that we must only direct our most powerful, unconditional desires and aversions toward things that are entirely within the small, manageable sphere of the dichotomy of control, our judgments. When we desire fame or the approval of others, we have effectively placed our inner tranquility under the complete, capricious control of external events and unpredictable people. The ultimate practice of self-sufficiency, autarkia, in the realm of desire means consciously constructing a life where one's dependence on external, contingent factors for internal contentment is minimized. This ensures that the state of eudaimonia is self-generated, sustained by one's own unshakable reason and virtue, and thus becomes utterly impervious and unassailable by the external vicissitudes of fortune. These cognitive practices form the basis of the Stoics' enduring power and resilience, preparing them for inevitable hardship by securing their inner fortress of reason. The ultimate practical application of these techniques can be seen in the Roman imperial context, where Stoicism found its most famous voices. The success of the Roman Stoics, from the wealthy Seneca to the slave Epictetus, proved that these philosophical techniques were applicable to every walk of life. Their power lay in providing practical tools to fortify the mind against the inevitable shocks of fortune. The enduring legacy of the Stoic emphasis on character over achievement is sustained by continuous mental practice. The Stoic concept of self-sufficiency, autarkia, in the realm of desire is not merely an abstract ideal, but a daily, conscious practice of minimizing reliance on external, contingent factors for internal contentment. This philosophical stance demands the creation of an inner state where one's happiness is entirely self-generated, sustained only by the unshakable principles of reason and virtue. This self-reliance ensures the soul becomes utterly impervious and unassailable by the external vicissitudes of fate. Voluntary discomfort, ascesis, is a key Stoic exercise promoted most vigorously by Seneca. It involves deliberately and periodically engaging in minor, self-imposed discomforts. This could include practices such as occasional fasting, deliberately sleeping on a hard floor instead of a comfortable bed, wearing simple, rough clothes, or enduring a cold bath. The intention is not to cultivate asceticism for its own sake, but to inoculate the mind against the psychological terror of future involuntary hardship. Seneca argued that by voluntarily exposing oneself to hardship, one removes the element of surprise and the illusions of one's current state being the permanent reality. The practice teaches the mind, I can survive without luxury. I have experienced discomfort, and it did not destroy my capacity to reason. This practical preparation builds profound mental resilience. The Stoic also uses the technique of the reserve clause when engaging in any action whose outcome is external. When pursuing a preferred indifferent, such as seeking a promotion, engaging in a business venture, or attempting to complete a long journey, the Stoic mentally includes the specific, necessary reservation. I will do this, but fate permitting, or if nothing prevents me. This mental detachment or reserve clause ensures that the moral good, the virtuous effort and rational planning is secured internally, regardless of the external outcome. If the outcome is successful, it is an agreeable indifferent. If the outcome fails, the internal moral good remains untouched because the failure was already rationally accepted as a possibility permitted by the Logos. The crucial distinction between physical pain and psychological suffering is central to this discipline. The Stoic distinguishes between pain, algedon, which is merely a neutral, unavoidable sensation or signal in the body, and suffering, pathos, which is the self-inflicted irrational judgment that the physical pain is intolerable, catastrophic, or unfair. The practical exercise is to train the mind to experience the physical sensation without adding the negative emotional judgment. Seneca advocated the technique of enduring pain by distraction or by minimizing the experience through calm reasoning, separating the body's sensation from the mind's evaluation. The sage, though experiencing the physical sensation of pain, is theoretically free from the suffering that pain usually brings, because they withhold assent to the judgment that the pain is an evil. The pervasive concept of memento mori, the Latin phrase meaning remember you must die, is a vital, non-morbid Stoic practice. It is not intended to induce gloom or despair, but to achieve two primary ethical goals. It is a potent philosophical tool to give urgency to one's moral choices, eliminating the tendency toward procrastination and recognizing that the time available for the practice of virtue is finite and uncertain. It serves as the ultimate application of the dichotomy of control. The fact of death is the ultimate external, the final certainty. Accepting it rationally and calmly is the ultimate test of the Stoics' belief in the Logos and Providence. Marcus Aurelius frequently used the technique known as the view from above, epistrophe. This mental exercise involves deliberately taking a cosmic perspective, viewing one's own immediate petty problems, and even the entirety of one's own fleeting life, from a vast spatial distance, from the perspective of the whole universe, and a vast temporal distance, from the perspective of eternity. This visualization achieves a profound sense of detachment, instantly reducing the perceived size, significance, and importance of one's own worries, anxieties, and personal affairs. It reveals the individual's concerns as infinitesimally small against the background of the boundless cosmos, thereby facilitating a return to reason and tranquility. The sage and the proficient, the goal and the path. The Stoic system is built around a theoretical ideal, the perfect practitioner, and a practical reality, the diligent student. Understanding the difference between these concepts is vital to the humility and persistence required of the philosophical life. The sage, a sophos, is the supreme mythical ideal of the philosophy, the theoretical perfect being. The sage is defined as the person who is entirely free from all irrational passions, apatheia, who makes zero errors in judgment, always correctly applying the dichotomy of control, and whose internal moral will is in a state of continuous, perfect accordance with the universal reason of the Logos. The Stoics were clear that historically, the sage was an almost unattainable figure, perhaps never existing in reality. They might cite Socrates as the single closest example. This unattainable ideal serves not as a source of frustration, but as a guiding star or an absolute standard of moral excellence against which all practitioners must measure their progress. The vast majority of practitioners, even the esteemed Roman Stoics themselves, humbly considered themselves as Procopton, which literally translates as a person making progress or a proficient. The Procopton is the student who recognizes their own imperfections, acknowledges their failures, but demonstrates continuous, consistent effort toward the ideal. The philosophical life, therefore, is not a sudden transformation or a destination to be reached quickly. It is a commitment to constant, incremental improvement, a continuous process of monitoring one's judgments and correcting one's errors. The concept of the moral imperative is the understanding that regardless of one's status as sage or Procopton, the rational duty remains the same, to exercise the moral choice, prohairesis, virtuously in every single moment. The failure of the sage is the failure of character. The failure of the Procopton is merely a temporary lapse in attention. The final, overarching ethical fact about Stoicism is its singular and unwavering focus on character over achievement. It categorically demands that we judge the value of a human life not by its external successes or failures, not by the size of one's fortune, the breadth of one's fame, or the length of one's life, but solely by the moral quality of its choices, the rationality of its judgments, and the consistency of its effort. This enduring emphasis on the inner citadel, the secure, rational space within the mind that is immune to external fortune, is the reason Stoicism survived the fall of empires and continues to offer practical guidance millennia later. The philosophy asks one final, profound question. If everything else is taken from you, what remains? The Stoic answers, my capacity to reason well, and that is sufficient for happiness. This focus on the internal character and moral duty leads naturally back to the central Stoic belief that the individual is not alone, but a citizen of a boundless, rational society. The next facts will further explore the social dimensions of Stoicism, detailing its invention of cosmopolitanism and its direct influence on the formation of Western law and political thought. This focus on the internal character and moral duty leads naturally back to the central Stoic belief that the individual is not an isolated entity, but a citizen of a boundless, rational society. The pursuit of personal virtue is inextricably linked to the fulfillment of universal duty. The next facts will further explore the social dimensions of Stoicism, detailing its invention of cosmopolitanism and its direct influence on the formation of Western law and political thought. Despite the intense necessary focus on achieving internal freedom and self-mastery, Stoicism is not an individualistic philosophy concerned only with personal tranquility or solitary isolation. On the contrary, it is a deeply social and political philosophy that mandates active duty, benevolent action, and positive contribution to the universal human community. The Stoic realizes that the individual is merely one necessary part of the great, interconnected organism of the world. The crucial Stoic concept that explains this deep social connection is oikeiosis, pronounced oikaiosis, a Greek term best translated as appropriation, familiarization, or self-affection. It describes the fundamental, innate human impulse and the subsequent philosophical process by which we rationally extend our sphere of ethical concern. This concept posits that a human being begins by valuing its own self-preservation and comfort, but quickly, through the use of reason, learns to extend that valuation outward, first to the immediate family, then to friends, then to the neighbors and local community, and eventually, through the recognition of shared rationality, to all of humanity. The core social doctrine and one of the most radical political contributions of the Stoics is the concept of cosmopolitanism. The term cosmopolis literally means citizen of the world. The early Stoics, beginning with Zeno, were the first school of philosophy to rigorously argue that one's primary and most fundamental allegiance should not be confined to one's geographically and politically limited city-state, polis. Instead, a rational human being's highest loyalty belongs to the rational, universal community of all human beings, which is governed by the divine reason of the Logos. This concept of shared rationality and universal community elevates justice, dikaiosine, to the highest of the social virtues. Since every human soul is considered a shared fragment of the divine, or a spark of the universal Logos, the Stoic has a rational and moral duty to treat every other human being, regardless of nationality, social status, or wealth, with profound benevolence, fairness, and absolute respect. This is the foundation of Stoic egalitarianism. The discipline of action, the third discipline in Epictetus's curriculum following assent and desire, is wholly dedicated to the fulfillment of one's social duty and the necessity of acting justly within the human community. It moves the philosopher from internal contemplation to external engagement, addressing the crucial question: how should a rational, virtuous human being utilize their choices in society? The Stoic accepts and takes up its specific, defined social roles, such as father, daughter, citizen, judge, or soldier, not for personal fame, profit, or power, but purely as the practical material upon which to practice virtue and as a necessary means of contributing to the well-being of the universal whole. Marcus Aurelius emphasized that we are made for cooperation, like feet or hands. The Stoic understanding of empathy is rooted in this rational kinship. It is not conceived of as emotional mirroring or the adoption of another's distress, but as rational compassion or benevolence, a product of the virtue of justice. When other individuals act foolishly, maliciously, or spitefully, the Stoic trains the mind to see their action not as a direct personal offense, but as a deep, correctable intellectual error and ignorance of the true good, virtue. This perspective transforms the malicious act from an occasion for personal anger into an occasion for rational pity and corrective, objective action. On anger, the temporary madness, the greatest threat to this social and rational composure is the passion of anger, which the Stoics analyzed with chilling clarity. Anger, ira in Latin, orge in Greek, is considered by the Stoics, particularly by Seneca in his definitive treatise on anger, to be the most vicious, acute, and socially destructive of all irrational passions. Seneca argued that anger is a temporary, catastrophic form of madness that completely compromises reason, making the angry person unable to perceive truth, distinguish justice, or feel benevolence. Seneca argued that anger must not be merely moderated or held in check, a solution offered by some other philosophical schools, but must be completely extinguished, extinguenda. It must be prevented from ever taking root in the rational soul, because even its mildest form is a deviation from reason. The Stoic analysis reveals that anger is fundamentally rooted in a false, arrogant judgment. It stems from the judgment that a significant external wrong has been done to me, that this wrong was not permissible by the Logos, and that the appropriate response is immediate, personal retribution or vengeance. All these assumptions are rooted in errors concerning the dichotomy of control. The Stoic technique for preventing anger is primarily preemption. Seneca advised that one must avoid the beginnings of anger, noting that once the passion gains momentum, it drags the mind along irresistibly. Practical preemptive steps include delaying the response, withdrawing from the immediate stimulus and repeating the key Stoic principle, they are acting out of ignorance. The delay technique is crucial. Wait even a moment before responding to an apparent offense. This pause allows the initial, irrational impulse to subside, providing the window necessary for the rational faculty to reclaim control and evaluate the impression objectively. Forbearance is a Stoic virtue derived from justice. It means recognizing that every human being, including oneself, is deeply flawed and prone to error. To expect perfection from others is irrational, and therefore to become angry at their inevitable flaws is a self-inflicted injury. Natural law and political influence. The Stoic ethical framework had immense, lasting practical influence on the development of Western political systems and legal structures. The Stoic concept of natural law, lex naturalis, is one of their most powerful and enduring intellectual contributions. It is the belief that there exists a universal, objective, and eternal moral code, a law written into the very fabric of nature and the cosmos by the Logos, that is accessible to all human beings through their shared reason. This idea stood in sharp contrast to the previous Greek emphasis on positive law, nomos, which was based on local tradition and human decree. Natural law, being universal and immutable, provided a higher standard against which all human-made laws and governments could be judged. This doctrine became the single most influential philosophical concept in the shaping of Roman jurisprudence. Roman jurists, most notably Cicero, who was heavily influenced by the Middle Stoics, incorporated the principles of natural law into the ius gentium, law of nations, laying the groundwork for many foundational elements of Western legal systems. The principles of natural law, including the concept of equality under a universal moral code and the inherent dignity of all persons, were later adopted and synthesized into early Christian theology, particularly by figures like St. Paul, and subsequently became central tenets of medieval philosophy and political theory. During the Enlightenment, the Stoic notion of natural law directly inspired key political philosophers who developed the theories of natural rights, universal equality, and the concept of the social contract. These theories were fundamental to the American and French revolutions and the subsequent establishment of modern liberal democracies. The Stoic practice of living in accordance with nature in this legal and political context meant establishing laws and governments that align with the universal, rational order of the cosmos, promoting justice, reason, and shared benevolence among all citizens. Thus, Stoicism's legacy is not confined to personal ethics. It is woven into the political, legal, and theological foundations of Western civilization itself, proving that the ancient philosophers sitting on a painted porch in Athens were, in fact, laying down the universal rules for the world that was to come. Their teachings on duty, justice, and community demonstrate that true self-mastery is always pursued in service to the collective, rational whole. The strong ethical framework and cosmic understanding of the Stoics are only valuable insofar as they can be rigorously applied to the chaos of daily life. Stoicism is, at its heart, a profoundly practical system, one that requires continuous, daily mental exercises, not merely intellectual study, to achieve true mastery of the self. The next facts will delve into the essential, actionable methods that the great practitioners employed to maintain their inner composure. Philosophical journaling is a quintessential and historically critical Stoic practice, perhaps best exemplified by the work of Marcus Aurelius. The Meditations are not theoretical essays. They are a direct, sustained record of this practice, the emperor's private philosophical diary. This form of writing is not meant for the purpose of historical record or artistic expression, but purely for self-admonition and self-correction. The purpose of this journaling is to create an external, objective record of one's inner thoughts and judgments. By writing down one's anxieties, one is forced to confront them using the logical structure of Stoicism. The practitioner is required to translate nebulous fear into specific and testable propositions, asking, is this event truly up to me? Is this judgment aligned with virtue? Morning preparation is the first critical daily exercise. The Stoic does not simply rush into the day, but begins with a period of structured mental rehearsal. This practice involves deliberately projecting one's mind into the future hours and mentally rehearsing the challenges, difficulties, and potential moral compromises that are likely to arise. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, repeatedly used this technique, reminding himself upon rising, "Today I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, envious, and unsocial man. All these things have come upon them through their ignorance of what is truly good and evil. But I have seen the nature of the good, and the nature of the evil, and the nature of the one who does wrong, and I know that I must act justly." This exercise is not a pessimistic forecast, but a form of emotional preemption. By anticipating the inevitable flaws and errors of others, the Stoic prepares a rational response beforehand, neutralizing the potential for surprise, disappointment, and most importantly, the highly destructive passion of anger upon encountering them. The goal is to meet adversity with an already reasoned plan, making the reaction a matter of choice, not impulse. The evening review is the necessary complement to the morning preparation, a practice highly recommended by Seneca. It is a rigorous, dispassionate nightly self-examination, a moral audit of the day's actions, failures, and missed opportunities for virtue. The evening review requires the practitioner to ask a series of pointed, challenging questions, such as, where did I fall short in my commitment to justice? What did I do well in my display of temperance? What irrational judgment, assent, did I give that led to passion, pathos? And what could I do differently tomorrow to better align my will with the logos? This review is not an occasion for guilt or self-flagellation, but a purely diagnostic process, identifying mental errors so they can be corrected and prevented in the future. The view from above, spistrophy, is another highly valued visualization technique, particularly utilized by Marcus Aurelius. This mental exercise involves deliberately shifting one's perspective from the specific ground-level details of one's immediate life to a cosmic, vast temporal, and spatial scale. The practitioner mentally visualizes their body, their city, their life, and the whole history of humanity from a vantage point high above the earth, from the stars, from the periphery of the universe. This exercise serves two profound purposes. It drastically reduces the perceived size and importance of one's own worries, anxieties, and personal affairs, e.g., a traffic jam or a financial setback, and it reinforces the Stoic truth that the individual is but a temporary tiny part of the immense, ordered whole, the logos. Memento mori, remember you must die, is a crucial daily reminder that is practiced not to induce fear, but to instill a vital sense of urgency and gratitude. By contemplating the brevity and fragility of life, the Stoic is psychologically compelled to eliminate procrastination, to prioritize virtue and duty above all else, and to value the present moment, the only time where true virtue can be practiced, as an immense, unrepeatable gift. Premeditation of evils, praemeditatio malorum, is a form of mental inoculation. As detailed previously, this is the deliberate rehearsal of future potential misfortunes, loss of wealth, sickness, public shame. The purpose is not to dwell on morbidity, but to secure the inner self against external shock. The practice teaches the mind to recognize that the mere possibility of misfortune does not justify suffering. Suffering is only rational if and when the misfortune truly arrives. Seneca argued that he who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. Voluntary discomfort, ascesis, is the physical application of praemeditatio malorum. By periodically and deliberately engaging in self-imposed minor hardships, abstaining from food, enduring cold, or living without luxury, the Stoic builds psychological resistance. This exercise proves to the mind that true human necessity is very small, and that all the perceived needs of luxury and comfort are merely preferences, easily dispensable without compromising one's core capacity for reason and happiness. The final aim of all these cognitive and physical practices is to achieve a state the Stoics termed atektos, unshakability, a state of constant rational composure that is utterly impervious to the turbulence of the external world. This unshakable state is achieved through a singular focus on controlling the one thing that can never be taken away, one's own judgment. These daily exercises ensure that the Stoic philosopher is always a prokopton, a person making progress, actively training the soul to distinguish truth from illusion, virtue from vice, and the controllable from the uncontrollable. The ultimate prize is a freedom that is internal, absolute, and secured by reason alone. The philosophical strength, born of this daily self-correction, directly informs the enduring influence Stoicism has had on subsequent ethical systems and practical psychology. The next facts will explore how the cognitive models of the Stoics, developed through centuries of practice, were integrated into modern therapeutic and legal frameworks, proving the timeless utility of this ancient wisdom. The philosophical strength, born of this daily self-correction, developed through centuries of practice by figures like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, directly informs the enduring influence Stoicism has had on subsequent ethical systems, legal structures, and practical psychology. The next facts will explore how the cognitive models of the Stoics were integrated into modern therapeutic and legal frameworks, proving the timeless utility of this ancient wisdom. Stoicism, unlike many of its ancient philosophical contemporaries, never truly disappeared from Western thought. It experienced a significant, pervasive, and often subtle influence on many subsequent schools of thought, particularly during periods of social turmoil and intellectual transition. Stoicism heavily and demonstrably influenced early Christian thought, particularly in the foundational writings of St. Paul. Paul, who traveled extensively through the Hellenistic world, was almost certainly familiar with Stoic ethics, terminology, and concepts. The profound concepts of an omnipresent providence, pronoia, the moral imperative toward self-control, temperance, the notion of a universal moral code, and the inherent shared humanity of all people, cosmopolitanism, resonated deeply and were synthesized into early Christian theology, bridging the gap between pagan philosophy and the new religion. The profound Stoic idea of natural law, that there exists a universal, objective moral code inherent in nature and accessible to all human beings through their shared faculty of reason, became a foundational element of later Roman law. Roman jurists and legal scholars, recognizing the stability and universality of this concept, incorporated it into the ius gentium, the law applicable to all nations within the Roman Empire. This concept provided a standard of universal justice against which localized, human-made laws could be measured. This integration laid the essential groundwork for many foundational elements of modern Western jurisprudence. During the medieval period and the Renaissance, the writings of the Roman Stoics, especially Seneca, remained highly influential. Seneca's essays and letters were widely read and admired, often shaping the ethical and dramatic literature of the time. The great Renaissance thinkers and writers were captivated by the Stoic emphasis on human dignity, self-mastery, and the power of virtue in the face of fate. This influence extended even to the development of the heroic, self-controlled characters found in the works of writers such as William Shakespeare. The concept of the inner citadel, a psychological fortress often associated with the reflections of Marcus Aurelius, became a powerful metaphor during the Renaissance and the subsequent Enlightenment. This idea describes the secure, rational space within the mind that is entirely immune to the violent fluctuations of external fortune and external opinion. This notion provided intellectual armor for thinkers advocating for individual autonomy and intellectual freedom. Philosophers like Michel de Montaigne and René Descartes were profoundly influenced by the Stoic method. Montaigne, in his famous essays, frequently utilized Stoic techniques such as praemeditatio malorum and memento mori to analyze human life and fear. Descartes, the father of modern rationalism, was heavily indebted to the Stoic emphasis on separating the rational mind from the emotional body and on the power of reason to achieve certainty in knowledge. The Stoic concept of apatheia, the freedom from irrational passions, was translated into the Enlightenment ideal of rational control and dispassion in intellectual and political discourse. It shaped the notion that the highest form of governance and personal conduct must be dictated by calm reason, not by chaotic, fleeting emotions. During the Enlightenment, the Stoic doctrine of natural law and cosmopolitanism directly inspired key political philosophers who developed the modern theories of natural rights, universal equality, and the concept of the social contract. Thinkers like John Locke and Immanuel Kant drew heavily on the Stoic assertion that certain rights and moral obligations are inherent to human nature, independent of governmental decree. This influence was fundamental to the intellectual justification for the American and French revolutions and the subsequent establishment of modern liberal democracies. The immense practical utility of Stoicism was fully recognized and formalized in the 20th century, where its cognitive models were integrated directly into modern psychotherapy. Dr. Albert Ellis, the influential founder of rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, explicitly and repeatedly credited the writings of Epictetus as the primary direct inspiration for his psychological work. The core cognitive model used in modern cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which states that our thoughts or judgments about events, rather than the events themselves, are what lead to our feelings and behaviors, is a direct, systematic restatement of the ancient Stoic observation. This critical axiom comes directly from Epictetus. Men are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. The entire methodology of CBT, identifying irrational beliefs, challenging them with reason, and replacing them with rational evaluations, is the therapeutic re-engineering of the Stoic discipline of assent. The revival of Stoicism in the 21st century, often termed modern Stoicism, is a powerful testament to its timeless, practical utility. This revival has seen the philosophy gain immense appeal among people in demanding fields such as technology, business, military leadership, and sports, precisely because of its focus on managing anxiety, controlling emotional responses, and cultivating resilience under extreme pressure. Many prominent contemporary figures, particularly in military and executive leadership, have publicly credited the daily reading of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius as a primary source of ethical guidance and psychological resilience, demonstrating that a book written by an emperor on the battlefield 1,800 years ago remains a fully functional manual for life today. The moral imperative of Stoicism remains its most profound contribution. It is the unwavering insistence that the final, unassailable value of a human life is measured not by its material successes or its external triumphs, but solely by the moral quality of its choices, the rationality of its judgments, and the consistency of its effort in the practice of virtue. This commitment to constant, lifelong dedication to ethical improvement is captured in the final, comprehensive understanding of the philosophical life. The core question remains: if all external circumstances are taken away, what remains? The Stoic answers, my capacity to reason well, and that is sufficient for happiness. This profound sense of self-mastery provides the ultimate meaning and purpose. The final element of the Stoic worldview returns to the individual's journey toward the ideal. The philosophical life is a continuous, practical dedication to the maxim, the wise man is always free. This freedom is the final, unassailable fortress that exists only within the rational mind. The exploration of these 100 facts culminates in a final reflective summary of the Stoic vision, integrating the physics, logic, and ethics into a singular practical creed for living. The final facts will provide a powerful summary of the three great disciplines and the core principles that define the life of the Procopton, the person making continuous progress. The final element of the Stoic worldview returns us to the individual's practical journey toward the ideal. The philosophical life is a continuous, practical dedication to the maxim, the wise man is always free. This freedom is the final, unassailable fortress that exists only within the rational mind. The final facts will provide a powerful summary of the three great disciplines and the core principles that define the life of the Procopton, the person making continuous progress. The exploration of these facts culminates in a final, reflective summary of the integrated Stoic vision, a singular creed for living that merges the rigorous understanding of the universe, the precise analysis of the mind, and the moral demands of social life. The entire practice of Stoicism can be distilled into the three disciplines of training, initially outlined by Epictetus. These are not merely academic classifications, but functional tools for daily self-mastery. The first discipline is the discipline of assent, synkathesis. Its aim is truth, to ensure that all one's judgments, opinions, and beliefs are aligned with objective reality. This is the intellectual work of applying the dichotomy of control, constantly questioning the validity of impressions, and withholding immediate assent to those that are vague, terrifying, or irrational. The success of this discipline results in atelia, or intellectual freedom, ensuring the mind is not enslaved by falsehoods. The central concept in this discipline is the control of judgment. Epictetus argued that the most vital task in life is to keep one's moral will, prohairesis, in a state that is aligned with nature. By never giving immediate, unquestioned assent to the impression that an external thing is an evil, the Stoic achieves a secure, unassailable inner state. This intellectual fortress is the foundation of all emotional resilience. The second discipline is the discipline of desire, bolesis. Its aim is acceptance, to ensure that one desires only what is achievable and rational, virtue, and accepts what is inevitable, fate, or the logos. This involves the rigorous eradication of the four destructive passions, pathos, distress, fear, lust, and excessive pleasure. The success of this discipline results in apatheia, or freedom from chaotic passion. This discipline mandates the practice of negative visualization and premeditation of evils, praemeditatio malorum. By mentally rehearsing the worst-case scenario, the Stoic proactively inoculates the mind against future shock. Furthermore, by directing the only true desire toward virtue, the Stoic ensures that the source of their contentment is entirely internal and therefore perfectly secure, unthreatened by any loss of wealth, health, or social standing. The third discipline is the discipline of action, horum. Its aim is duty, to ensure that all one's social behaviors are rational, just, and benevolent, aligning with the universal community, cosmopolis. This discipline is the external manifestation of the inner work, demanding that the Stoic fulfill all their social roles and duties as a friend, citizen, and human being with integrity, fairness, and courage. The success of this discipline results in dikaiosune, or perfect justice. This discipline requires the active suppression of anger, which is viewed as a betrayal of rational community and a temporary madness. It emphasizes forgiveness, based on the premise that others commit wrongs out of ignorance of the true good. The final measure of this discipline is that the action itself, performed virtuously, is the only moral good. The external outcome is an indifferent, to be accepted conditionally under the reserve clause, fate permitting. The entire system is oriented toward achieving the sage, its sophos, the ideal theoretical being whose three disciplines are in perfect, continuous harmony. The sage possesses eudaimonia, perfect human flourishing, because they are never wrong in their judgments, never fall prey to destructive passion, and always act with perfect justice. The practical value of this unattainable ideal lies in its function as an absolute standard for the Procopton, the person making progress. The Stoic life is not measured by the number of successes achieved, but by the persistence and intensity of the effort applied. The true Stoic is the one who, having fallen short, as all humans must, immediately rises, corrects the error through rigorous self-review, and re-engages in the struggle to reason well. The Stoic concept of nature is the final synthesizing principle. To live in accordance with nature means to live in accordance with the universal rational flow of the cosmos, physics, and in accordance with one's own unique, rational human nature, ethics. When the inner life reflects the outer order, true tranquility is achieved. The Stoic legacy is fundamentally the triumph of character over circumstance. The philosophy teaches that the world will always be unpredictable, often cruel, and ultimately uncontrollable. But it teaches that the self, the inner citadel of reason and judgment, can be made absolutely impregnable. This security is not achieved by escaping the world, but by engaging with it fully, rationally, and with benevolence. The teachings of Zeno, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius provide a set of practical tools that transcend time and culture, remaining a fully functional operating system for the human mind in any epoch. They offer a creed built not on wishful thinking or external promise, but on the simple, verifiable truth that the only thing truly sacred and the only thing truly free is the rational capacity of the individual soul. And so, the journey through the foundational facts of Stoicism concludes with the essential paradox. True freedom is found not in seeking mastery over the world, but in achieving perfect submission to the truth that only your own judgment can ever truly harm you. This intellectual freedom is the final, unassailable fortress that exists only within the rational mind.